Today is Wednesday, March 26th, 2025. This is Bryan Gable and Joey Reynolds filming with the National Corvette Museum. Today we are at Werner Meyer's Automobile Restoration Shop in Madison Heights, Michigan, and we are joined here today by Tom Peters, Randy Wittine, and George Heberling, and the focus of this discussion will be about early ideas, designs, and plans for the mid-engine Corvette. Tom, if you could start us off by just giving a little bit about your background and experience and what you did for General Motors.
Sure. Yeah. I think off and on Corvette's been a big part of my life. When these guys were actually doing it and working in Detroit, which I hadn't had a clue, I'd seen a '63 Stingray for the first time in third grade. That left a definite impression. Hitchhiking one day from Minnetonka Country Club, and I turned around and I said, this guy isn't going to pick me up, but he pulled up in a brand new '68 coupe right behind me, and I went for a ride in that to my next stop to head home. I wish it was longer, but those left distinct impressions. And then I would draw rat faint cars all the time, and one of the biggest ones was, my favorite was Corvette, obviously. And from my point of view, the big block Chevys and Corvettes were just almost unobtainable, exotic superheroes. You could see them, but to encounter one in real life or experience one as a young kid was virtually impossible. And they were just incredibly aspirational and inspirational for me, because that carried me through into designs, going to design school eventually, and then having the honor of being asked to join the GM team and invited into the Corvette studio by Jerry Palmer to work with my heroes like Randy Wittine here on some, just to me, the pinnacle of design. Worked with Corvette over the years since I think the tail end C4, when we worked on the ZR-1, and then throughout the years off and on to where I was eventually asked to lead the design studio. And so I ran the programs on the 6th generation, 7th generation, and then again, just unbelievable opportunity and gift to be involved with the C8 mid-engine Corvette. And I retired in 2019, and busy still connected with Corvette. It's not a car, it's not a company, it's a lifestyle. And once you understand that and you're honored to become part of it, your life is it turns out to be incredibly special. Not just the vehicle, but most particularly the people.
And then, Randy, could you talk about your associations with GM, what kinds of work you did, and how you were associated with the Corvette?
Yeah, I worked for GM for about 44 years as an exterior designer. And of those 44 years, I spent almost 30 years designing Corvettes. And like Tom, he had recollections from when he was a kid. When I was a kid, there was a little cardboard model that was distributed in the Nabisco shredded wheat box, and that was my first vision of a Corvette. And little did I know that I'd have a lot of involvement later in the years. And like Tom, the Corvette's a special deal, and when I got hired at GM, I like big Buicks and Oldsmobiles and stuff like that, and I had a chance to design those cars very, very briefly. But you never thought that you'd be able to, do the flagship of the GM design fleet. So I'm very fortunate to have spent that many years working on Corvettes. And as far as the mid-engine Corvettes are concerned, I first worked on the mid-engine cars when I worked for Larry Shinoda back in the 1960s. And each Corvette, each new design had a parallel program that involved mid-engine cars. So for 30 years, on and off, I've worked on mid-engine cars. And unfortunately, I retired before the real production mid-engine car came out.
Didn't we all?
Yeah, but there was a good man was in charge of it. Tom Peters took over the reins and did a good job. So I'm glad after 50 or 60 years they decided to do it.
And then, George, could you talk about your background, what kinds of work you did with General Motors and your affiliation with the Corvette?
Sure. Actually, well, similar to these gentlemen here, I started out with Corvette in my eyesight. When I graduated from high school in 1954, I was able to drive a 54 Corvette to my graduation night, which was, and I just ran across that picture the other day looking for some other pictures, and I was quite surprised that I had that thing. But I've been interested in Corvette, since I started with General Motors, but I started in the plant organization. And I went through the plant organization, but in 1959, I ordered my first brand new Corvette. I bought a 59 Corvette. The only problem, of course, was with that General Motors UAW had gone on strike for 11 weeks. So the car was ordered, was built because we were able to figure out that it was built, but it couldn't be shipped. So I had to wait 11 weeks for that car. So for my first new Corvette, waiting 11 weeks was kind of a problem. After that, I drove it around for quite a while and enjoyed the car. But as it turns out, when you decide to buy a house, that makes a good down payment. So I was able to sell that. So then after we got financially situated a little bit, I bought a 57 Corvette fuel-injected 4-speed. And since I was into drag racing, this car was set up for drag racing, so that's, rather than doing sports car type stuff with it, I did more drag racing with it. Then when I got promoted and transferred from the plant organization to Chevrolet Engineering in 1962, I sold the car. So that was the last Corvette I owned. But as it turns out, when I went back to the engineering center, I was following the Corvette, the Chevy 2, and the Corvair. Now those are three, from our perspective in engineering, low volume cars. Everybody wanted to work on the big cars and the trucks and that kind of stuff. But I had all three of them. But I had the 63 Corvette in 1962. So I was part of the cadre of people that put the 63 Corvette in production, including the problems we had with it and ironing it out. But the Corvette went from a simple build of the original Corvette, which was built from what we call from the inside out. You took the pieces that constructed the Corvette and built them from the inside out. So the car was never the correct size and was generally bigger than it was. In '63, we came up with a metal bird cage for the cab that substantiated the design quality of it. And then we built the car from the outside in, so it was always the same size, and the doors were always aligned and all that kind of stuff. And I was part of that program. And of course, that program was bothered from the very start. When we went down for prototype build, we took the bird cage down, and we took the bond strips, which go between the metal and the actual outside panels. There's a bond strip that was going to be epoxied to the bird cage. But at that time, we were using a 375-degree lacquer paint. So when we ran the bird cage through the paint oven, the bond strips were all popped off because the lateral expansion of metal and the lateral expansion of fiberglass were different enough to set up shear loads on it, so it sheared virtually all the bond strips off. So that required at that time to go back into the fastener group, and that was the first major use of pop rivets to pop rivet the bond strips onto the bird cage, and then we could glue the body to the bird cage. So I went through that segment of the Corvette in 1963. Then I went on to bigger and better projects elsewhere in different product lines and things like that. But in 1969, I was transferred back as resident engineer at St. Louis for the Corvette, for the Chevrolet B car, the light duty trucks, and the Blazer. And that's when I got into the production of Corvettes again. And that's ironically when I ordered and had built the ZR-1 Corvette. So I retired after 41 years, and I would love to have another Corvette, but unfortunately at 89 years old, I'm not too sure I could get out.
So there's been this idea of a mid-engine Corvette for several decades now, long before the C8 was unveiled. This was a major goal of Zora Arkus-Duntov. Why was it that Zora really wanted or pushed for a mid-engine Corvette, and what inspired him to try to bring that platform to the Corvette?
Because he knew that was the coming deal as far as performance was concerned, and it was if Chevrolet back in the 60s when I was there, if they had done it, if they had started that back then, they would have been one of the innovators of the mid-engine performance car. And unfortunately, they waited too long, and they became like the last person to have a mid-engine car. So he was ahead of his time, and you know, unfortunately, he was working in a corporation that was you know, counting dollars and cents too. So you know,
do you think Randy
it didn't fly?
Yeah. Do you think Randy he also saw that was kind of a trend in racing to
sure.
transition into mid-engine?
Sure.
That's kind of where that came from, maybe because it was a better balanced platform.
That's right. And don't forget, GM was involved through the back door with the Chaparrals.
Yeah.
And that's when the first Chaparral was a front engine car. And they transitioned to a mid-engine car, and you know the history of the Chaparral. It was a very high-performance, winning car, and then it would have been the perfect time to come out with a street version of it.
So were there other people within GM who were kind of in Zora's corner about doing a mid-engine Corvette? Other folks that maybe he worked on designs with, or contributed to some of these early mid-engine prototypes?
Everybody who was an enthusiast was for it. Everybody at design staff would have loved to have seen it done.
Well, Gib Hofstetter, you know, was a real champion of the mid-engine Corvette, and that's why he and Zora, you know, came across the Lamborghini Mira, which was their marquee car to try to physically sell the mid-engine Corvette, and that's how I got involved in it. Was we brought the Lamborghini Mira down to St. Louis during my time down there to try to get the plant in bed with the program. They're saying that financially is always justifying a program of that order of magnitude of change from where the current Corvette stood in the eyes of the corporation is a major investment. And being able to get everybody in the chain of building it, from styling to engineering to manufacturing, assembly, and sales, if you got everybody lined up, then selling the program through the corporation is easier, not necessarily easy, but easier. And so one of the aspects of that was to get the people assembling the Corvette, which in the Corvette plant within the St. Louis plant was one of 3 or 4 vehicles that they actually produced in that facility. They had a truck line, they had a passenger car line, and they had a place called the Flour Mill, which is where it got its name because the Corvette was in there. It was an area that they built Corvettes in. So to facilitize and refacilitize the facility to handle a midship Corvette, there was going to be investment at that level. So if they had that entity in the daisy chain that said, hey, we can do this and we can do it for this kind of money or time or effort, then you've got one more thing going for you. And so that was the reason why they sent the Mira down to me, to try to convince these people that they should participate in that. So maybe help the thing out. unfortunately, that was in 1969, so you can see how long it took to convince the rest of the people.
I mean, didn't the serve cars kind of help with that? Because to your point, in order to get, I mean, most people are not visually literate, you know, they have a hard time, you know, seeing or envisioning future state. So that's where the vision vehicles, the concept cars really play a big role. And, you know, I don't know if they did any of those early in the 60s. I know they had those serve cars, which are kind of more engineering prototypes, weren't they? I mean, you guys talked about
the
that
Serve
one,
1, Serve 2,
which
yeah.
was mid-engine.
Those were Zora's toys, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, where he developed this and developed that, and it all went along with the development. You know, at engineering staff, you know, within a few people of the mid-engine Corvette.
But also he could let those people sit in them and drive them.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's how you get people on board with a program. I mean, every nickel in the dollar makes a difference. And if you physically have something that demonstrates, as your point is, it's like trying to go out and build a house. You look at a plan, you know, what is the house going to look like? Well, the same thing holds true for a vehicle. You've got styling drawings, you've got engineering drawings and all that kind of stuff. But the people that you want to sell it to need to see something tactile, something to sit in, and that kind of stuff. And even better, in the case of the midship, not that the Mira was the best example of that, but it was an example of a midship engine Corvette. You could actually get people to sit in it and get the, you know, theoretically see the benefit of the car. So all these little pieces make up the puzzle, and the puzzle is trying to, as you point out, getting the finance money. The corporation has to decide to take an investment that is producing a good car and so on, so many, and the amortization of Corvette parts is a heck of a lot longer than B car cars. So the sales job would have to be a little order of a magnitude greater, and the styling drawings, you know, certainly gets that in front of people. That's one, you know, that's the start of the whole thing. That's the most important part of saying, okay, visually this is what it's going to look like, and then building prototypes or styling vehicles or getting the mirror to somebody.
Cars.
Yeah, that's right. And so it takes everything, some bigger than others, to get the thing rolling.
But another realistic reason, money-wise, was the front engine production Corvette was just coming into its own. And it was becoming,
the volume was going up.
It was becoming very successful, and the people in charge probably said, you know, let's not be too hasty with that.
That's right.
So that's another reason right there. You can't blame them for that.
No, that's their job.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was going to ask you guys, hear any rationale for why they, I mean, mid-engine configuration is certainly provocative, you know, if they do it right, you know, and the concept cars shows, you know, provides a tangible vision that the whole enterprise can get their arms around and understand, and either, yeah, that's really inspiring, we're going to do that, or no, the time isn't right. But it sounds like the discussion back then was, they said, hey, this thing is great, why would we want to change it? You know, and it's really, you know, it's gaining momentum and it looks awesome. You know, was that kind of some of the discussion back then?
It was probably because they were satisfied with what they were doing after, you know, the initial 53, 54 Corvette it took a while to generate interest in it, and when it finally did, they said, you know, we finally got this thing going, you know, let's just leave it there. But, you know, like I said before, it still would have been the perfect time to do it with the Chaparral race car parallel program. That's what we have now. That's what Tom worked on when he designed. That's how he worked when he designed the mid-engine car. There was a parallel. You designed the car so that it was functional as a race car. There were things on the car that were functional as a race car and also were usable as a production car.
Yep, I think from the standpoint of being in that era as a kid, I can tell you, yeah, you can't blame them for staying the course with a front engine one, because I tell you again, just as a 13, 14-year-old kid, that when that that Corvette was a mind-blowing event, and such an exotic vehicle, an American vehicle that you could actually see on the street. I mean, I couldn't even imagine anything wilder than that. It was just amazing, you know. I can still recall those, you know, those points. But to Randy's point, you know, Zora was inspired probably to go mid-engine in great part because of the trends in racing. And as it proved out to where it finally came to fruition, that, you know, we worked hand in hand with when Herb Fischel initiated the corporate racing Corvette program that involved the C5, you know, the C5R, and then beyond, where we just started to understand, you know, getting back into corporate racing. And Randy, you know a lot more about this than I do. But from my impression is we learned a lot that first Le Mans series, and then we built upon that, made a concerted effort. It was not by accident that we became more and more, had more internal cross relationship with Chevy Performance and Chevy Racing, working with Pratt & Miller, hand in hand, to where we truly looked for opportunities and I think took advantage of them, to where we were the concept designs affected the race car for its image, and conversely, the elements that were learned in racing had direct, meaningful, substantial effect on the production cars and enhanced their desirability. And I think they kept gaining more and more credit, not only here locally in the United States, but internationally, and that was the goal. You know, in fact, in Europe, these exotic cars really don't get a lot of respect or taken seriously until they make significant accomplishments in the racing world over there. That's my understanding. So it was a serious effort, and to Randy's point he made earlier, we did some of this with the C7R, but the C8, from day one, we were developing the race car body and the back and forth collaboration with the race team right there in the studio. You know, back and forth between Pratt & Miller and the studio on a weekly, if not daily basis in some form or another, you know. And I think that kind of gets back to Zora's vision of having the Corvette had this race relationship. And obviously what we're talking about here today is the natural configuration is mid-engine, and I think that's why the car's successful, because it's a serious effort. It's not just a kind of a styling exercise, you know.
So you talk about the race involvement. You know, back when I was involved with the C2, 3, and 4, you did the car, and then it was another whole development for the race car. Zora had tried to have as much input as he could with the cars back then, to the point of as far as design staff was concerned. If racing needed something that on the bodywork that we could do, Zora was right there, like extended or larger fenders, the shape of the fenders and so forth. So his input, other than engineering and mechanical stuff, his input to our people at design staff was pretty involved, because you know, everybody respected Zora, and we had enthusiasts. We had enthusiasts in design staff who were willing to do that. So that was the limited amount of racing involvement that we could have back then, as opposed to Tom doing a race car and a show car and a production car, right? But same car. That was great.
Well, one of the things that you have to remember, when the Corvette really came out, of course, Zora wasn't involved, and it was not a race car. It was a styling exercise for a different car. It was fiberglass, low volume, cheap. You know, I won't say cheap to make, but cheap tools, less investment to come up with a car, affordable volume car for the first several years, until Zora came into the organization. and that was the car that he focused on, and I think, you know, that he was instrumental in getting the V8 to be put into that particular car, you know, and he used to have a passenger car frame under it with a greatly styled, you know, sports body that was out there that people like. So now he was going to try to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear of a sports car from a passenger car frame and body. So then the styling changed from the 53, 54, 55 to the 56, 57 was a fairly major change. More aerodynamic, etc., which is where styling played the part where Zora wanted that to happen. And Zora always had an uphill battle because of the money. And Ed Cole, I think, was his big supporter as far as the Chevrolet investment portion of that program. And then, of course, when I got into the 63, of course, the 63 was the next big step because independent rear suspension and those kinds of things, and another styling exercise, a coupe body because Le Mans and stuff like that, potential, and the convertible, more aerodynamics and stuff like that. So the total involvement of General Motors, from styling, you know, to Zora, who's the, you know, racing type guy. Well, for many years, you know, Chevrolet, everything that was involved with racing was, you know, behind the walls. I mean, that's not something that General Motors wanted to do. General Motors as a corporation was not a racing corporation. So everything he had to do to do these cars worked hand in hand with anybody who was interested, and we're fortunate that styling was interested in supporting that because there's a challenge and fun to do. And so everybody he enlisted in those programs seemed to me was enthusiastic about what he was doing, whether it was styling or me dealing with the plants or something like that, to get them involved in that project. It's like you say, it's more than just a car. It's different in
Lifestyle.
And the people that worked on that in all the venues had the same kind of input and interest in it. And once it became, and it was a sales car. It was on the showroom floor. You could bring people in and sell them the big cars and that kind of stuff. Yeah, that kind of stuff. But also people took them out and raced them, and that's what Zora was about. I mean, you know, Zora. It was an engine engineer. That's his stock and trade. That's how he made his living for many years before he came to General Motors. And he loved race cars, and he loved to try to go as fast around a track as anybody could. And it was a matter of styling and the mechanics of the car. And the next step was this midship engine thing, and that meant a big change and the styling that went with it, and the mechanics within the car that went with it, and how do you execute all that? And it took a heck of a long time to get there. And once the corporation embraced all of that, you know, and the sales department embraced the change in styling, the car got old like every car does, and changing to a midship engine car changes the styling aspect of it, too. So now you've got a new car out there that can generate some interest. So presumably there's another reason besides racing and that kind of stuff, because we got a new styling car that's part of the modern era.
So some of the prototypes that Zora and his team worked on, the Serv cars, particularly Serv 1 and 2, the Serv 1 open wheel, modeled after an open wheel racer, the Serv 2 with the twin transmission system, very different from production Corvettes at the time. As automobile designers and engineers, what kinds of things would you learn from testing cars like that are very different from Corvettes that could be applied to a Corvette design at some point in the future?
Well, aside from mechanical stuff, you could learn a lot of aerodynamics. Aerodynamics was just coming into its own back then, and Larry Shinoda was the chief designer of the Corvette back then, who I worked for. He was involved in those serve cars as much as anything else. He was involved in the chaparrals too, did aerodynamic testing and so forth on those. And he even went to the point of having his own little model wind tunnel in his styling studio. Because you know, there were very few people involved who were interested in aerodynamics back then.
Or understood it, appreciated it.
Well, the thing is, with a midship engine car, you don't have the radiator sitting in front necessarily, and you can style the front end for downforce and aerodynamics and speed and all those kinds of things. So, what mechanically you learn from an experimental car is not only what to do, but what not to do. So there's two series of lessons that you can learn. I don't know if we always learn them, but you can learn both what not to do and what to do. And so prototypes and that kind of thing are an integral part of any long-range development program.
Yeah, that's right. That's why you test them in the wind tunnel. And now it's great. Now they do everything in the wind tunnel. You know, I remember Max Schenkel was a aero test engineer, and he was very knowledgeable. He was one of the guys who helped build the GM wind tunnel. He helped design it and build it. And I remember he was an expert in aerodynamics. And I'd ask him, I'd say, well, Max, what do you think about if we do this? And he would always say, well, I'm not sure, let's test it. So there you go. Testing is everything.
You know, there's like an art to it, isn't there? I think that's why design, at least that's my impression, is why design became an integral part of as it gained more higher level of appreciation, the relationship between aerodynamic engineering and styling. And to me, that's what true design is, when you're designing something that works extremely well, but it's executed beautifully. You know, that's, to me, that's the key. And you can develop things as you look at aircraft, and boats are beautiful. They're just, a lot of them are incredibly beautiful, and it's driven by function. And as long as you're there to work with it, because it is somewhat of an art. The term that I remember, Colonel Froehling talking about was being directionally correct. It doesn't mean that's the solution. That means in general it's going in the right direction, and there are so many different variables. It's not just plug in a formula and that's what it's got to be. There's different ways to skin a cat. So you can go down 2 or 3 different paths in terms of surface development. Being mindful of the fact, if you change something here, it could affect something back here, in a crazy way you never would expect. So that's why I think having an open mind, and Dr. Schenkel would say, yeah, let's try it and see what happens, because in many cases you're surprised, in the tunnel. And I think the mid-engine, just one more comment, the mid-engine profile, it lends itself perfectly in so many ways to packaging, all that we've talked about here, racing. And one of those aspects, I think it's more conducive for an optimized aerodynamic shape.
And to that end, one of the other aspects of the aerodynamics and the styling and using the wind tunnel, my daughter-in-law is an acoustical engineer, or was an acoustical engineer at the Proving Grounds, but the car is going to be sold. So eventually you have to go inside the car to see what kind of noise is generated outside the car, because if you get an aerodynamic situation, there's no weather strip that's going to take care of that.
A lot of it's noise.
Exactly. So you need to go through the wind tunnel, the styling to the wind tunnel, see what kind of numbers you get in the way of aerodynamics, but what are you getting inside the car as well as outside the car. So the amount of information you get from that continues to build the program to satisfy all of the aspects of the program.
It helps you to not make a mistake, because wind tunnel testing will tell you whether you got something good or not. And then if you don't, you have to change it.
There you go. I mean, you talk about noise. I mean, to me, the aerodynamics is, downforce, cooling or airflow, how you manage the air, and then noise. Because man, we'd spend hours on the mirrors. And why is that? Yeah, you want to reduce the drag, but it's the type of noise generated from the passenger compartment. So yeah, that's a good point.
And it's there forever if you don't do it.
Oh yeah, it'll drive you crazy. You don't know where it's coming from, but it'll drive you crazy. It becomes a customer dissatisfier. Whining at us.
So eventually we get some of these prototype mid-engine cars that are more intentionally designed to be like a Corvette, have some Corvette badging. The Astro 2 being one of the first examples of that. We talked about how before it didn't necessarily make financial sense for a mid-engine Corvette like that to go into production. Were there any other concerns or shortcomings about the Astro 2 that made GM kind of turn away from that car?
Well, the Astro 2 was really done in a time where they were questioning whether they should do a mid-engine car. But at the same time, they knew that people like Ford was doing some work on mid-engine cars. They were more involved with mid-engine racing than we were at the time, and they had to stay abreast of the possibility of what would happen with the Ford car. Would Ford come out with a mid-engine, or whatever? So the Astro 2 came out as a design study, but it also was in the New York Auto Show, because they just wanted to show that GM was still involved with this kind of a vehicle. And then there were several others at the time that came out as design and engineering studies, but they were used as show cars. They were used as a display of what the possibility was at GM. I think GM was just waiting to see what everybody else would do.
Well, what year was the Astro 2? Do you recall that?
Pardon?
What year was the Astro 2?
In the 60s. I was involved with designing the mid-engine cars back then at the same time, before it came out.
Okay.
But
it was about the same time frame. Is the Astro 2 the one they had they packaged a big block in it?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That was all part. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they had the Astro 2 and they had the XP819, and there were quite a few mid-engine or rear engine. They did a lot of studies back then. And at the same time, they always would appearance-wise they looked like the evolvement of the Corvette design. The next engineering study was the next evolvement of what the new Corvette might look like.
Randy, that must have been an exciting time to be around then with those cars going on. Were they Studio X cars?
They were. We were over in the warehouse.
Yeah, okay.
They were warehouse
kind of
cars.
A Studio X.
Yeah. Studio X was a studio that was Bill Mitchell's private studio in the basement. And it was a small room. It was like half the size of this room right here.
Good thing it was a small car, right?
Yeah, well, you had to get back to look at it. So he decided, well, I want to keep this involvement further away from anybody's eyes. So he had a studio set up over in the warehouse across the street.
Well, Randy, you were talking about how some of these prototype cars were kind of a preview of the next Corvette design. Could you maybe give another example or two of that sticks out in your mind as something direct from the prototype cars that went into the next Corvette?
Well, like the 819 had it was done at the same time that the Chaparrals were done. It had the spoiler in the rear, and it had the front end with the possibility of little winglets in the front for front end downforce, and which you get into the C3. The C3 had the spoiler on the front end, and the original C3 68 had a little ducktail in the back that was done on previous show cars. And then sometimes you do a show car, like the four rotor Corvette, and it's the way Bill Mitchell wants it, with a pointed rear end. But that evolved into the slope down rear end on the '74 Corvette. But that Corvette, there was always a spoiler design that would take it back to an efficient aerodynamic shape. So, and sometimes the show car that you're doing doesn't necessarily get positioned into the new production car, because you timing wise, it just was a particular design that wasn't used.
You had a couple other cars around that time period that also functioned as show cars. The XP 882 was another one. Can you guys maybe provide some examples of how that car might have influenced future Corvettes?
The 882, excuse me, was kind of known as the Reynolds aluminum car, because there was I'm not positive, but I think Reynolds Aluminum wanted to do a specific engine for a Corvette, and that car was done between my time in the Corvette studio. I was shifted over. I was doing Oldsmobiles at the time. So, but anyway, the appearance of that car was done when I wasn't there, and it was the forerunner of the four rotor appearing car. So the 882, and there were parts of the 882 that were not really finished the way you would like to have finished. So it was more of a design and mechanical study as opposed to a show car. When it became a show car, when they wanted it to become a show car, they made a few changes on the front end and the rear change to get it to be, they niced it up, so so it could be a show car. But here again, they wanted to have something out in the public that they wanted the people to know that we were thinking about it.
Yeah. Was Kip involved with that, with the Reynolds car?
I don't know.
Not the Paris, I think he was.
I don't know.
That's one with the sugar scoop headlight, right?
That's the two rotor car.
Okay, all right,
That's the two rotor car.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, something that was associated with kind of developing this mid-engine Corvette was the experimentation with the Vonkel rotary engines.
Thanks, Warren.
Can you guys maybe talk about what kind of improvements maybe that General Motors made to those engines, or how much there was of a push to associate those engines with performance cars or even the Corvette?
Well, I'm not that familiar with why they did that. I know that there were factions within the corporation that were trying to develop the Wankel engine, the rotary engine. But I think it was, here again, it was a parallel program in reality, and at the same time they had the opportunity to do a show car, which was the four rotor Corvette, actually two show cars, and the two rotor Corvette, to show off the fact that they're trying to develop this engine, and they're also showing off the appearance as show cars. So it's keeping the public abreast of what their thinking, their possible thinking is. And then at some point they just decided not to go ahead with that.
I think Corvette, at least from my perspective, is it was always a carrier or showcase for the most advanced technology, whether it's powertrain or suspension or electronics, whatever. wanted to make sure that somehow that factored into, whatever generation Corvette was being developed at the time, whether it's just an upgrade or an evolution of the current generation, or a new, or showing what the next generation could be. They have always went out of their way to look for new technologies that you could apply and integrate into the car. So I think that's where Wankel came from. I think it was a Bob Stempel. I think was a big proponent. I might be wrong. Was a big, huge proponent of the Wankel powertrain. And again, from my perspective as a young man, was that was an incredibly advanced powertrain that was totally unique to all that we had experienced before with conventional, piston crankshaft motors. So that was like, whoa, again, this is like space age technology. And to see that applied, or at least considered or explored within Corvette, just seemed just so right in terms of, projecting what Corvette was about, front leading edge technology. And again, jet fighters have always been a source of inspiration for cars over the years, and Corvette, since day one, I mean, they say it looks like a shark or whatever, but in many cases it looks like a fighter aircraft, jet fighter, and certainly I've seen sketches and concept images of Corvettes being associated or influenced or tied in with aircraft. And during my involvement with Corvette, I certainly applied it. Why is that? Because most jet fighters are small cockpit, one or two pilots or passengers, and they're purpose-built, state-of-the-art, super pinnacle of high performance within their realm. And to me, that's a perfect alignment with what Corvette philosophy has been, should be, or is, and what it should be going forward. In my mind.
Plus, they look neat.
Well, the look,
The appearance.
it has purpose. It's. I remember the term, in the hunt. It looked serious, but it was beautiful. But you knew exactly what that was about, and that was like attaining ultimate performance.
Well, that goes back to the midship engine or rear engine vehicles, no matter what. Mm-hmm. The suspension changes. The Corvette front engine independent rear suspension was the first one we had in '63. Mm-hmm. Well, that has a leaf spring. It had a leaf spring in it and that kind of stuff. But a midship car is a different styling package because the suspension is different. The engine's back there. You have to package the suspension different. Mm-hmm. That's the reason. Another reason for building these cars is that how do you put the components that are germane to that particular vehicle in? Just like the Wankel, yes, the midship comes out with a quote-unquote V8, which we're all familiar with, mm-hmm. but it's a different V8. And the suspension in the rear is different. Therefore, the suspension in the front is different. We've gotten rid of the radiator in the front. We can do different. Mm-hmm. So that's where all the prototypes go. Plus the fact, as you guys in styling know, you can go revolutionary in styling and maybe fail pretty quickly, or you can go in slowly and not make any mistakes. But what you want to do is have the most advanced styling you can have with a package you're allowed to work with to bring out a car that's really going to catch people's eyes and still meet the sales objectives. And that's a heck of a requirement for styling, quite frankly. I don't think that I would like to be in that end of the business and try to do that.
Well, you have to be aware of what's happening around you at the time. And I think the important thing is having somebody at that particular time who is a good designer and knows just what he's doing. Like Tom was involved with the current. He was in charge of the current mid-engine Corvette, And it's a lot more edgy, let's say, than I would have done if I'd have done it. But the time was the factor. And if you look at cars nowadays, there's a lot more edges on it that are also aerodynamics. Mm-hmm. So it's you got to get the right person at the right time to do the car.
Exactly.
Well, Tom, you were talking before about how the Corvette is like a carrier and a technological showcase. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about how that informs your design, especially for some of the Corvette prototypes you did a little bit earlier in your career, like the Corvette Indy, for instance?
Yeah. When I was invited into the Corvette studio about that time frame, be kind of early, mid-'80s, and we'd been working on some sports car concepts, not necessarily Corvette, in the advanced studio. And Jerry had seen some of the work that I had done and asked me to come up and got involved with the Corvette Indy with Randy. And I can tell you, as a kid, I hadn't a clue what I was doing. So coming into an environment where you got folks like Randy and Roger Hewitt and Jerry in there, and then the sculptors, and then the studio engineers and the engineering team, and get involved with these cars, you ramp up real fast. But I think at that time coming in, what I didn't understand is that the shape has to convey the technology that's within, so that when the customer sees it, yeah, they get it, they understand, and it's gonna, the shape, the car's gonna deliver on the promise that shape projects from a design perspective. So the whole, correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, the whole premise around the Corvette Indy was to showcase this Ilmor Indy engine development, and show that motor in a again, just all that we've been talking about here as far as Corvette being the halo vehicle and being the pinnacle of what General Motors could accomplish in a vehicle, obviously a high performance vehicle, that the Indy was going to be presented on a global stage that presented the best not only of what the performance could deliver from a racing technology standpoint, and there's another example of your racing integration, not just in image, but no fooling, genuine representation or expression of high performance in a not only street but a race environment. The Indy, there isn't much of a better way to showcase an engine, I think, than on a mid-engine platform visually, because you can have it, most mid-engine cars, in many cases, for instance, Ferraris, they display the engine. To me, the engine, I knew back then, I know it now, and I still believe it, that the engine is the heart of the vehicle. And I think, again, coming from where I've had experience as a kid and throughout my adult life, where you get involved with building engines, and it's the heartbeat of the vehicle, and to have that be an integral part of the overall design statement further lends legitimacy and just depth of what it becomes more than just a styling statement. That's true design, and we can all recite the cars that demonstrate that very successfully over the years. But with Indy, I think that kind of rocked the world out there. I think in many cases, not only from a mid-engine Corvette latest statement, but expressed kind of where General Motors was going to be heading with their involvement with racing. They were serious about it, and they wanted the best technology that was available on the planet to get involved with, to integrate into their effort. And I think the Corvette Indy, through the help of, I did a couple sketches, but just with guys like Randy, and I always I have so much respect. I like to give credit to the sculptors that were involved with that to create this incredibly sophisticated shape that I think I think it influenced a lot in the world. And again, that goes along with all of that is what Corvette was all about, and the fact that it delivered on the promise of not only kind of revolutionary design from a shape standpoint, interior and exterior, but revolutionary in terms of performance, and including and revolving around the powertrains. If that makes sense to you. I mean, that was like it was a multi-valve, 32-valve motor. It was a precursor to the ZR-1.
There's an interesting story about that time at GM with mid-engine Corvettes. Because at the same time that car was being done, the Corvette Indy, and Tom basically it was his design that was being used, with alterations here and there. But at the same time, I was working on the mid-engine GTP car, the race car. And we did that. We did the tunnel testing at GM, but we did the car out at Diversified Fiberglass out in Pontiac, Michigan. And we did the car out there because they were going to make the parts, and it was just easy to do it out of the studio where there was, you'd have to explain why you're doing this and so forth and so on. Because it was a race car, and it had to look like a Corvette, and so forth and so on.
It does.
And the Corvette, the body was developed into the race car, and they were having cooling problems with it. It was all developed over a Lola GTP mid-engine program chassis. So not the chassis, but the package. They were having cooling problems with it, and at the same time, the Corvette Indy, there were parts of it, bodywork, that were being done over in Italy. And they wanted somebody to come over to Italy to make sure that they were doing all the right things. And the Lola people wanted somebody to come over to England to make sure that the changes we made, changes they made, were according to what we wanted. So at the same time, Tom had to be in Italy and I had to be in England. And Jerry Palmer, who was our boss, he says, "Man, I'm losing my designers. They're going to be hanging around in Europe." And I told him, "Hey, you're good. You can handle it." So
He visited a couple times. Did you visit with the GTP car at all? Did he come out to England at all?
Did what?
Did Jerry come out to England at all during that?
I don't think he did. I don't think he did. I don't remember him coming out, but he was over there at that time.
Well, he came out for the Indy when we went up to Lotus.
Yeah.
He flew out there with me initially to see the car. And then once we got there, we found out they actually had shipped it to Italy.
Yeah.
And we're building it there, and that was kind of a fun time. But what was cool is that we got to spend time with Tony Rudd.
Yeah, and to get back to get back to performance deal, the mid-engine car was a promotion. The mid-engine race car was a promotion for General Motors that were getting involved in racing.
Yep.
And the Corvette Indy was a promotion for the engines that were being used in the Indy cars.
Yep.
So it was a twofold mid-engine Corvette situation there.
I didn't understand and didn't expect the impact that car was going to have around.
Yeah,
the world.
well, it was
kind of rocked the world.
Yeah, it was a major design thing, and it was another real advancement of the mid-engine Corvette, the possibility of a mid-engine production Corvette.
Oh yeah, I remember the magazines. Is the next generation going to be mid-engine Corvette? Or someone made the assumption the next generation is going to be a mid-engine Corvette. Here it is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here again, a lot of design elements that were on that car were bypassed when it came time to do the real mid-engine production Corvette. It's just they went by the boards.
Well, what kinds of design elements wound up getting overlooked once the C8 was released? Were there things that had been previously tried that maybe people assumed would be part of a mid-engine design that they went a different direction with?
Well, things that I know is cooling, right? You needed bigger openings for cooling.
Yeah.
And you needed it. You needed to change the front end on the Corvette Indy, and you needed to change the intake on the side of the GTP car. So cooling was a factor that factored into what the cars would look like.
I mean, you may have a general understanding when you do a concept car what the basic configuration is going to be, but when the decision's made to no fooling, we're going to do a real vehicle now, that's when the realities kick in, and you start to have to consider the true aerodynamics, the packaging of the elements and the different components, and for instance, be able to get the air into them, cooling, wheels, tires, suspension, suspension travel, all those kinds of things that will drive the final configuration of the vehicle. Manufacturability, materials that are being used, sequence of assembly, all that comes into play. Cost, all those things that would drive you crazy. But those are when you start dealing with true realities of doing a product that's going to be produced and able to perform day in, day out in hostile environments, and in some cases just driven to the ragged edge, either on the street or on the racetrack. So all those elements come into play and will affect the design. But I will tell you, the C8 is a culmination of every, in some form or another, whether it's philosophy or experience or direct inspiration from everything that had come before that. It wasn't a clean sheet of paper. People often say, well, how long did it take you to do the mid-engine Corvette? And they think, well, 4 or 5 years. No, it took since probably, you go right back to when Zora said, hey, I really, you have to imagine his accent, but I think the Corvette should be mid-engine from way back in the mid-50s, the other thing, styling-wise, I will tell you from just a styling philosophy point of view, is, I had the experience of doing more of a rounded, flowing shapes in the Corvette Indy and subsequent cars that car influenced, including Camaro and maybe even some of the other vehicles that GM did and others as well. Is that in my brain, I knew, being involved in aerodynamics, you can have different configurations. They don't all have to be round. They don't all have to be square. I just felt I've done a rounded Corvette before. I thought more of an edgy, angular, kind of aggressive, in my view, a little over the top design was needed to come to express Corvette in a bold way. For the first time coming out, it had to make kind of an in-your-face statement. So it would have been successful to do a more rounded shape, but I felt I've been there, done that. I wanted to do something different. And, again, all the things that roll through my mind, like, this car is going to be a direct competitor against Porsche. Well, Porsche's super round, and, Ferraris are more round. I wanted to do something that was opposite of that. That was actually more Lamborghini influence than Ferrari or Porsche, because I wanted, in my mind, I wanted to express a car that would contrast with its competition, its main competition. Not like a Me Too, or I would hate to say, oh, that's just a Me Too Porsche or a Me Too Ferrari, Although it's been compared to being like an American Ferrari, and I'm happy for that. And there was actually, and Randy can attest to this, there's always been a link between Corvette and Ferrari, wouldn't you say, just philosophy-wise? And you probably know the quote better than I do. Like, not that we would steal from them, but was it Bill Mitchell said, hey, if you're going to steal from somebody, steal from a bank or the best.
Not a candy store, yeah.
Hey, don't steal from a candy store, steal from a bank.
Yeah, right.
And then referencing Ferrari. So we always had that in the back of our minds. It's not like, oh, I want to do a Ferrari tail lamp or a Ferrari fender. I wanted it unique, but there's a philosophical understanding or an expression, sculptural expression that Ferrari and Porsche have, and we're always mindful of that. And some of it can be inspirational. Some of it, as I was just telling you, if they're turning left, I want to turn right. So that also affected it too. But there are cues throughout Corvette's history that you can trace back and you can identify. I can point them out on a C8.
Well, it's Corvette heritage.
It is,
like,
yep.
just like the C3 sitting here. It has an edge, and you use an edge in the new way, in the current way.
And the flaring fenders and all that.
Each change, C1, 2, whatever, through 8, each change had a definite reason for the change. So the C3 went to the C4, and the C4 became a smoother car because a lot of people thought that the C3 was had too many edges and too many shapes and so forth. That's why the C4 looks like a boulevard cruiser.
Yeah.
And the C5 has a little bit of a kick-ass shape to it because it looks like a race car. And then the C6 goes back to the heritage of the C3 with that race car proportion
And
the
bullet fenders.
Yeah, and the edges. And the C7 was a real kick-ass car. That's the C7. It's a great-looking car, and the mid-engine car keeps the heritage, but has a lot of the borrowed images of other cars and done in a Corvette way.
You know, the Stingray concept that I was involved with, and that came right after the C6, and we had the team together. Things were kind of slow, and over the years, you might have gotten this over your career too, Randy. Say, well, why don't you guys just do a '63 Stingray again, the split window? That's the coolest car ever, man. Why don't you just do that? And you go, in your mind, you're going, well, you know, if you love that car, just go buy one, you know? It's like, that was then, this is now. But I thought, you know, that kind of rattled around in my head. So I said, hey guys, and we had a great team together. Let's take a run at doing like a modern version of the split window. And there's a long story there too, but we did that kind of in secret. That became the Stingray concept car that eventually developed into a full-on running vehicle. But that was an expression of the '63 reinterpreted, and that had direct influence on, I can tell you, on the C7 and C8. Camaro came out, had inspiration from a form vocabulary from that Stingray concept. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that over the years, all those cars, exactly that, yeah, there it is right there. This little guy here, which I almost got fired for because I really didn't ask for permission to do some initial stuff. I won't mention the guy's name, but I think he wanted to fire me because I didn't ask for approval. You know, certain things I think you just feel you've got to do, and you get going so fast, you forget about you're supposed to talk to people before you get started. But it ended up, I think, being pretty profound because there's fender shapes on this that you can find right on the C7. And C8, as well as when we brought the Camaro back. And if you look at the new ZR-1, directly influenced by the '63 and this vehicle too. So what I would say is that the C8 wouldn't be nearly as successful if it hadn't have been the incredible creativity and work that had been done by design and engineering throughout its total history. Up to that point, because we looked at it all, and where we thought was appropriate, we applied it or interpreted it in a way that I think came out to be pretty darn successful.
So talking about
answering your question.
Well, no, talking about how the overall design of the C8 drew so much from past Corvettes, but that there had been this challenge previously of trying to overcome the cost of using the mid-engine platform for the Corvette. So when the C8 was introduced in 2020, what made that the right time to finally bring the mid-engine platform out for a Corvette?
I can tell you and certainly Randy knows, and you know, anyone who's been involved with Corvette up to that throughout the course of its history. But from my perspective, I had been involved with Corvette Indy and doing a few other projects along the way, doing advanced design or within the Corvette studio. When are we going to do a mid-engine? When are we going to do a mid-engine? We've tried over the years, certainly since I've been there and way before I ever got there. Randy will tell you more about that, but because he was there involved with those. But it just never seemed to be the right moment. But I remember we introduced the C7 ZR-1 in Dubai, and they said this was the pinnacle of, this is the most powerful Corvette ever done, the most capable. And it wasn't long after that, I remember in our studio, and I'm sure there's a lot more high-level discussion, say with Mark Royce, Mary Barr at the time, that I'm unaware of. But we would have a meeting every Monday called the POPs meeting, or kind of product operations meeting. And Tadge Jechter presides over that in a very small conference room, probably a third of this room. There might be 8 to 15 people in it, real tight space. And I remember him sitting at this front of the table, and I had a cup of coffee in there. We'd start like 6:30, 7 in the morning. And he said, it's time to do a mid-engine Corvette. I happened to witness that, or be present when he made that incredibly historically profound statement. It's like, you could have heard a pin drop in there. It's like, this was real, you know? And I've been trying to do that since day one, and here we go. So, and I got in a little bit of discussion, and I think we all kind of knew that the C7 platform, they wrung every millimeter, every fraction of performance out of that they possibly could, and that is expressed and demonstrated in the ZR-1. So that was the pinnacle of that platform. They couldn't get one more drop out of it. So then they rationalized it. It was time to make the leap.
There was no place else to go.
That's right. They wrung it all out.
That was it.
Which is pretty amazing, because think about the, 1919 or 2019, but that ZR-1 is still a formidable beast, and not just raw capability, but superb, sure-footed, global level performance that will compete with anything.
Plus the appearance of that car.
Yeah.
You see one of those coming, and man, it's like, yes, sir, I'm out of your way.
Yep.
We are continuing our conversation about the development of the mid-engine Corvette. We are now joined by Dave McLellan, who followed Zora Arkus-Duntov as the Chief Engineer of Corvette. And Dave, if you could start off just by telling us a little bit about your background and how you became Corvette's Chief Engineer.
I can do that. I started life at General Motors at the Proving Grounds. First in the Noise and Vibration Lab, and then at about the 9th year, I moved over to engineering test and was responsible for Black Lake, which we were just opening. So I was the first guy managing that particular property. As a part of that, we were asked by Frank Winchell to repeat the drunk driver test that he had done with Jim Hapsharp and Jim Hall. Yeah, which we did. And much to the chagrin of Lou Lundstrom, the director of the Proving Grounds, we bought a whole range of booze and had a jet helicopter that was assigned to us, and we used the sliding curtain test there as a guide to run these guys through the experiment of what happens to you from a cognitive standpoint as you drink and drive. What was humorous about it was that the guys that we picked were all GM executives to run the test. And I don't think any one of them was an alcoholic. Their ability to absorb alcohol was fairly limited. But then at the end of the day, we sent them home to their wives drunk.
Oh, no.
Well, that was it.
Different time.
Yes, just in time. And from that experiment, I guess I got some exposure, good or bad, and I was asked to do a job for John DeLorean, who was at that moment our he would have been the Chevrolet general manager, and what he wanted to do was find a way to combine the Camaro and the Corvette together in one basic platform. He had already been through the aluminum Reynolds car. In fact, that was actually built by one of the guys that came to work later for me, and that didn't meet some criteria for market and cost, so it didn't fly. And I can come back to that because that's the one I have as much experience with as any. The Camaro and the Corvette don't marry very well. I mean, they may use the same engine, but they use it in very different configurations. So my analysis of that, using designers from Chevy R&D, was that that was not a good idea. It wasn't going to work. And I think Duntov was worried about, I might say it would work, but honestly it wouldn't. And that was really my first personal exposure to Zora. And that was shelved. But later on in the book that I put together on the Corvette, Corvette from the inside, I used some material that Zora had given me when I became chief engineer, where they were back in the 60s, very early, looking at alternative configurations for the Corvette that could be from everything from a race car to a sports car to a more closed kind of car, and all based on what GM was very actively doing at that time, which was the, I believe it was called the Q car. And it was, in its passenger car configuration, it was a front engine, torque tube, bent torque tube drivetrain, and a automatic axle. It was, that too was shelved somewhere along the way, although Pontiac did use it. And probably the most interesting configuration of that ever came to production was the Pontiac Tempest with a V8 and the bent torque tube driveline and transaxle. So that was my introduction to Duntov and the things that he was passionate about, but not able to accomplish back in those days. Then GM sent me off to MIT for a year, which they did with a lot of their young executives. And when I came back, they put me to work with Zora, and some 6 months later, he retired, and they gave me the assignment of Corvette engineering director. But I was also told very bluntly, don't support styling with any of their mid-engine concepts. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, well, that's...
Did you know that, Randy?
Huh?
I didn't know that.
Wow.
But that says something about styling, right?
Yeah.
Because
Those
we were
renegades.
all for it.
That's new. That's interesting. They made a concerted effort to make that statement. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
That was Chevrolet, and that was top management in Chevrolet's
Oh my God.
position on that. My assumption is that they had such a hard time getting the original C1s up and running and with even halfway reasonable sales for the car, that they thought they had something that was working, and they didn't want to change it. And all the numbers that the marketing people put together for a mid-engine configuration just didn't add up to what they were already doing at that point. So it was that was another stillborn. Although Duntov certainly took it through the steel-bodied New York show car, New York show car, and then the Paris, New York show car, and then the Reynolds aluminum show car, which really predated what Honda did with the aluminum Accord, and then the bifold door, double-ended design that was, I think, called the
Aerovet.
well, it became the Aerovet when they put a real engine in it.
Four-rotor.
It was originally, the four-rotor, which was, by the time they put it in the Corvette, it was or in that four-rotor configuration, it was a disaster. I saw it at Road America. I had been brought up there by Bill Mitchell, and it was smoking badly and would barely make a trip around the track. And when it came time to put it back in the trailer, it wouldn't climb the hill to put it into the trailer. It just didn't have enough power left.
Who's driving the rotary engine in the corporation? Like,
The rotary engine was a program of Ed Cole.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he saw it not for the four-rotor version, but for a two-rotor version that would replace a wide range of passenger cars, powertrains, and it was very compact. As Mazda discovered to their chagrin, it had very poor fuel economy and bad emissions that were very hard to overcome. GM never overcome any of that, although Mazda was able to meet emissions with it, but they used it in a very limited configuration in the RX-7s. And it almost broke the company. And it did break NSU, who built the RO-80, a four-door sedan around that. And those engines wouldn't last for a lifetime. They were, they had the same problems. They just weren't
It was inherent to the
adequately
configuration.
developed. Pardon?
It was inherent to the configuration.
Well, it was inherent to a lot of things. Yeah, the combustion chamber with the Vonkel it's a very long banana shape, and so the surface to volume ratio is very poor. you're giving away a lot more heat without all that surface area to the cooling system that you didn't really want to do. And there was lots of places for tiny little fuel droplets to hide. That's one of the things they found out along the way with even the piston engines, is that a lot of the emissions came from these droplets that hid down around that first compression ring. Anyway, so I will just tell one more short story. After I was chief engineer, and we discovered that the aluminum Reynolds car was sitting out in the boondocks, if you will, at the tech center, I asked R&D if they would bring it in, clean it up, get the odor out of it, which really meant doing a new interior, and repaint it. And they did all that, and I had and some of the development engineers did have a chance to drive the car, and I would say it was like driving a Corvair. It was the closest thing you could say to it. It never had any development on it. It ran acceptably well, but it still wasn't a Corvette in the sense that Duntov had developed the front engine V8s, front engine rear drive V8s as Corvettes. They were very, very different in their feel and sound and the response of the car.
So we've been talking about the importance of testing prototype cars, what kinds of lessons can be learned from that, and what kind of innovations can be made. Dave, were there any particular mid-engine Corvette prototypes that you worked on or tested or developed that really stand out as having a great influence on future production Corvettes?
I would have to say no. The Reynolds car was available to drive, and we drove it. Not a lot, because it wasn't really going anywhere. At the proving grounds, we found that in the boneyard there, we had two Lamborghini Countachs. We had a mid-engine Ferrari. Let's see, what else? We had a Lamborghini Miura. And those cars, we got them all up and running, and learned a lot from them, as well as the front engine cars that Duntov had done. And as I looked at my job at that point, it was to understand what Zora had accomplished, and try to make sure that continued, because that was important to the personality of the Corvette. And we tried to do that. Noise laws get in the way. There's all kinds of stuff that intrudes that you have to deal with. But to the extent that we could, we followed that dictum from Zora. He said to me several times, Dave, you must do the mid-engine Corvette. And we never did back then. We had way too much to do with what we had available to us. It really took, as I look back at it, it took GM going through bankruptcy. It took new management. It took new leadership in Chevrolet and General Motors, for that matter, I think it took Mark Royce to make it happen. And the car that and it took Pratt and Miller to make it happen. Those are all the high-level things that Taj had to work with as he put together the actual production mid-engine Corvette, which is an amazing product. I was at Taj's retirement party, and the retirement party was full of the powertrain engineers who had just come from the dynamometer, and they were all excited about 1,064 horsepower, and that's what they were able to produce in this next generation turbocharged car. The flat plane crank, 5.5 liter, supercharged, turbocharged engine. As you crank the boost up on it, you ultimately run into detonation problems. And what they were doing was they were fueling the car with port-injected fuel to a certain level, and then finishing it off with injectors in each cylinder that were similar to the injectors used on the diesel engines, the piezoelectric injectors. And the piezoelectrics were fueling the cylinder in real time. So as the piston was coming to top center, they were adding fuel, and it was too late for the fuel to detonate in a destructive manner. But it was enough that they could get to over 1,000 horsepower. And you're going to see those on the road here pretty soon. I saw one just the other day, a bright gold Zora that was just running around Fenton. And so somebody from the proving ground probably had it, but it's going to completely change the exotic car market. It looks exotic, and it has performance that's up at the level of Bugattis and some of the wild Ferraris and Porsches.
Bugattis.
It's going to be an amazing car, and it's going to be a car that's way overpowered for driving below 100 miles an hour. But so be it. General Motors has finally got its mojo together on something, and it turns out the Corvette.
So back when you were examining the Lamborghini Miura and the Countach and experimenting with mid-engine Corvettes, by looking at cars from overseas, was there was there an intent to make a mid-engine Corvette that would maybe be sold, at greater numbers around the world, or was that really an influence to kind of boost Corvette's international sales, to explore the mid-engine platform?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when they sent me off to MIT, it was to a management program which spent a lot of time in the marketing arena. So, yeah, you've got to think in terms of marketing and where the markets are and how you're going to sell cars that are truly exotic. So, yeah, that was important. And it was also important to understand the visceral qualities of some of these cars, because that was also part of what one wanted to hold on and make part of whatever you were doing. It needed to be visceral, and those were very visceral cars, particularly the Lamborghini Miura, a wild car with a transverse V12 engine right behind your ear, and GM's car, and I think these were all bought by John DeLorean. So to his credit, he has he was part of the background that built the mid-engine Corvette program beyond Zora. Yeah, the GM car didn't even have air cleaner on the intake. It just had trumpets, and so the trumpets are right. The back window was right here behind your head, and just on the other side of that was the trumpets for all 12 cylinders, and it was wild. You didn't need a radio in that car at all.
That was the music.
Yeah, and I wrote about in Corvette from the Inside. I wrote about all these cars, and the Lamborghini Miura. It had, when we got it out of the Chevrolet boneyard at the proving grounds, its wheels were seized up, and there were all sorts of things needed to be worked on. But Chevrolet Garage, to their credit, brought the car back to life. And when it was ready to drive, one of my engineers and I got in, and I drove it down to the oval track, and stopped on one of the brake test pads to make a full throttle run, because it was warmed up by then. And I did a full throttle start, and all hell broke loose. And I didn't for a moment know what it was, but what it was was the entire rear of the car is hinged, and it's hinged down low. When you accelerate with a car, if things aren't latched up correctly, that hatch opens and drags along the ground. Not good. So we brought it back up to the garage and fixed that. And what it was, they had a latch in the door opening that when the rear hatch, which probably weighed well over 100 pounds, when it was locked in by this latch, the latch was out of the way of the door, so the door would close. But somebody had obviously opened the rear engine hatch and then put it back down, but couldn't close the door and didn't realize how it worked. And so they took these latches and just bent them out of the way, but never put them back so that they would latch the rear hood. And we fixed all that and got it running right, and that car is probably still around somewhere today. I don't know. It's a very valuable car if somebody owns it. It was a bright orange Miura. So yeah, I've written about all of those, and I also had a ride. I didn't get a chance to drive it in the twin turbo F40, but that was another really hot car.
GM bought one of those. I know Chuck bought one. Chuck Jordan bought one, but did GM bought one of those?
These are all GM cars.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about, Dave, you had mentioned the studying the transverse engine. If you guys could maybe talk more about maybe experiments or tests you did with the different position and orientation of the engine in some of these cars, and what effect that has, or what that helps to achieve design-wise or performance-wise.
Well, I must admit that I was rather annoyed with Chevrolet engineering management not wanting to think outside the box, if you will. And so one of the things that we did along the way in Chevy R&D was we took an 80X car coupe and put in one of the V6 aluminum engines that was being developed. I think they got them from engineering staff. And we put a second engine in the rear. So it was a twin engine X car. And it's not important that it was an X car. Chevy Citation, I think, was the
I rode that.
public
Dick
name.
Balsley?
Yeah.
He was involved with that.
Yeah.
I drove that car.
Okay. But that showed that it could be done.
Yeah. It was wild.
Yeah, and the comment that I got from engineering management was, well, how do you sync the front and the rear engines together? And the answer was, you don't. You just, the road syncs them together. So you could think of it in terms of putting a smaller engine in the front if you wanted, so that you got a low hood line, and then whatever big monster engine you wanted, put it in the rear. And most of the emissions that you have to deal with comes in that first period when you're starting the car and warming it up, when the catalytic converter is not effective yet. And so if you can use the front engine, small front engine with its own catalytic converter, and then a secondary catalytic converter back behind the monster engine, and get it warmed up, and now you start the monster engine. I mean, airplanes do multi-engines all the time. So, yeah, it never went anywhere, but we made the point, and I think we got management a little bit off their rear end with that, and got the program going with Lotus, and we used it in the front, of course, but it was used in the show cars. Serve 3 and 4 or something like that, as bid engines. So, yeah, we were slowly moving that way, but it was very slow. And I would have been happy with a twin engine configuration, because you could really generate power with the engines that we had at the time. And if we've got 1,000 horsepower today, you also want to have some sort of front wheel drive, and I think they've gone electric with that part of it, which is fine. So it's like a hybrid.
Yeah. I mean, the E-Ray, that's kind of the first kind of all-wheel drive production Corvette, and that's exactly what it is. It's kind of like a twin power plant Corvette, to your point, you know. You probably trace that back all the way to that push me, pull you X car, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's interesting connection.
Were there any of the mid-engine prototypes, and I'll pose this question to everyone here, that you that maybe you really wish had gone into production, or you thought might have been, kind of the one that makes the mid-engine Corvette a reality prior to the introduction of the C8, or is the C8 really the one car in the right time that it should have been?
Well, like we said before, the C7 was what they developed the C7 to the nth degree, and there was no place else to go. So, you know, that would have been it would have been the C8.
You know what I would say? Just from a sheer enthusiast standpoint, that Aerovet was just the wildest spaceship with the gold doors and the vented, and you could see the motor. Yeah, it was a rotor motor that wasn't very efficient. And I could just swap that out with a 400. Somebody put a 400 transverse in it. To me, it wouldn't have made a difference what powertrain was.
It would take a big block.
Yeah. Oh, it would hold a big block.
With a new rear end. New rear end. An aero sensitive rear end.
Well, yeah.
Well,
Body-wise, the
yeah.
rear end of the body.
Yeah, but that aside, that car was so stratospherically wild that would have just killed it on the road, in my humble opinion. And then I think the Corvette Indy, if that could have been made production, that would have knocked it for me. Those are two cars.
In my opinion, the Corvette Indy was just too soft. And I think the actual C8 that they came out with is probably too busy. Yeah, but those are all choices that one makes. When we started the C4, we had Jerry Palmer had a. I don't know whether you were there at the beginning of the C4 or not.
No.
Okay, but he had the four-rotor car in the studio, and used a fair amount of detail from that, like the cross section of the car, the long pointy nose. But he didn't like the pointy windshield. He didn't like that long tail. So we did a cam tail. A cut-off tail. So it's hard to see, but there's a connection between the C4 and the four-rotor car.
The connection between those two cars are right in the cowl area, right in the softness and the section in the cowl area between the C4 and the four-rotor.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, with the new windshield.
Yeah.
And that's where that's one of the nicest parts of the car is the cowl area and the shape of the fender behind the wheels.
Yeah. Putting the engine up front, it really makes you struggle with that because the distributor is at the back of these V8s at that point. They finally put it at the front. They screwed it up, but they put it at the front. No joke.
And you had to have the rear end on the C4 the way it was because of aerodynamics. You know, you couldn't have a long tail, and it had to work aerodynamically to get your numbers correct.
I drove the Aerovet at Laguna Seca. There was a big Chevy show out there. They brought out their experimental cars as well, and I got to drive that. You had to drive it with the gull wing door open because it had no ventilation, but that was just, it had never been developed. And I think it only had like an 8-gallon fuel tank. So the car was, it was going to have to grow some to be acceptable as a road car. But that's just what you do normally.
It was concept, right? So
it was a concept.
To start, and then it developed naturally if it were to go to production. But that's interesting. I didn't even make the connection between the C4 and Aerovet, but it makes sense now. It's the way some of those, the way those fenders
Yeah,
flow
between
and all that.
yeah,
Very sophisticated.
especially the front end
Yeah,
behind the
okay.
front wheel.
Yeah.
You know, it has
I
that
can see it now. I
smooth
never
shape.
put that together before.
The
cool.
C4 was done when Irv Verbicki was the vice president of styling. And Irv never liked the car. And he kept telling Jerry, you know, it's too big, it's too big. And it wasn't big enough, was the problem. Because you got to fit full-size people in it, and powertrain, and all kinds of other stuff.
Well, let me tell you a story about Jerry's attitude towards Irv. Irv came in to see the seating buck one day, and he says, "Jerry, this windshield is raked up. It's hard to get in. This windshield is raked too hard. You better let it come up a little bit and you know, increase the height." And then he leaves, and everybody's looking at Jerry. Man, what are you going to do now? And Jerry says, if you think I'm going to let an arthritic old man tell me how to design a Corvette, you're crazy. Jerry was with
dude.
you. It's like, we're doing this car the way we want it.
You know, you look at that car today, it looks, I mean, that car was revolutionary when it came out. I mean, that was a mind blower, that car. And you look at it today, the young folks now, they're gravitating towards those. Maybe they're because they're affordable, but I think in addition to that, the design, it has the legs. I think it is right size, which is driven by powertrain and the track and the tire size. That drives the proportion, right? And the packaging of the occupants. But they look great on road today. They certainly don't look too big compared to some of these other cars. Even some of the Ferraris are like, they're humongous. Some of the newer ones, you know. And you know, we all know why. But at any rate, the car looks great. The C6, I think, looks great on the road today. Look, it's got they've got legs, and I love seeing younger buyers getting into them and excited about them. You know, they're not only super capable, even in these cars that have been around for a while, but they look great, you know, out there on the street with the other cars around as well. They're proud of the way they look, so I think that's kind of cool.
Well, one of the things we were trying to do, and this is getting off the mid-engine a little bit, but I'll come back to it, with the C4 was lighten it up to the point where we weren't as troubled by underpowered engines. And that came about, I should say the reminder of that came about at the very beginning of the program. We had a drivetrain that was an early proposal for the C4 in a C3 out at the Desert Proving Grounds. And there was a corporate management show out there. And these guys all came through the Chevrolet garage. And this was summertime, I remember that, because it was hot out. And so they come into the Chevy garage, and we had the body off the chassis of this Corvette to show them some of the aluminum stuff we were going to do. And I had a pitch to give with pictures from Jerry of what the car might look like. And I went through that pitch, and when I finished, I asked if there were any questions, and Howard Carroll, who was the vice chairman, had come up through Oldsmobile and was now vice chairman of General Motors. He was the only one that asked a question. And his question was, can you fit a 4-cylinder engine in it? And you know, I had all kinds of backup slides, charts, ready to go, but who the hell would have thought of that? And the answer should have been, but it would have been rude. The answer is no, it would fit, but for what purpose? You'd be better off to cancel the car because the car would be a joke. Yeah.
Well, Howard Carroll was kind of a joke too.
Well,
I remember him from Oldsmobile.
yeah, but that's what you deal with. The guys all the way up to Roger Smith, who was of my era. They typically were not car guys. They were what they were. Yeah.
But also, too, could you also say, Dave, and you guys, that I would say maybe the majority of people in a corporate city, maybe in General Motors, don't understand what Corvette's about. A lot of times it's all pain. I seem to recall kind of an uphill battle explaining even the rationale for doing a vehicle like this. And unless you're in that, you get it, it's kind of you see on Jeeps. It's a Jeep thing, It's like you wouldn't understand unless you see it on the back of it. I think Corvette's similar in that, if you can appreciate maybe the way it looks sporty and all that, but you don't really understand the soul of it or its reason for being or just what it's all about, unless you're
right.
Not that you have to be directly involved with it from a production standpoint. You could be an enthusiast, but there are thousands of enthusiasts out there that get it, or millions of enthusiasts that understand it in a different way. But from a corporate business standpoint, it's not a rational, in many ways, not a rational, objective product. Would you agree with that, or not necessarily? It's more of a passion-driven statement.
Yes, absolutely. The best way I could describe what we were doing was we're building the car for ourselves. If you'd like to have one, we'd be happy to build you one.
Or we knew who would appreciate, who would resonate with.
Probably a good reason why it took so long to do the mid-engine, because there are a lot of people in the corporation like that. We want to do mass-produced cars. We want to do a lot lot of them.
There's a lot about that car and the Camaro that you can't rationalize it with a chart. It's something that's got to be in your heart, and that's the way I kind of see it. You can't describe it until you experience it. Then it might, not now I get it. Oh my God, now I get it. It's like in that Ford versus Ferrari movie where what's the Ford guy? He takes him for a ride and he's crying, at the end of the ride. Maybe because he was scared, but I think he finally realized with that car what the whole enterprise was about, right? I can see the same thing happening. To me, I think it's similar to the Corvette. It's just, it's a passionate, heartfelt effort on all those that are involved and all those that experience it, all those that own it or have businesses. People, men and women, get that. But I tell you, there's always explaining to do in a corporate environment.
Everybody who worked on Corvette had to be a salesman because you had to sell whatever portion of the program you were on and or help do that particular process to support the concepts that were going on, styling, mechanically, and all that kind of stuff. And if you weren't selling, then it wasn't going to go any further because the corporation's squandering money on the car because they tooled everything in the corporation. When we tooled a transmission, it was tooled for 8 million transmissions, and you had to use them until that 8 million and one was done. Those are called 3-speed automatics. Toyota tooled everything for 40, 60, 80,000 and then tooled something else to keep up with because they kept changing their product to keep up with the demand. But General Motors' great expenditure of money was based upon volume production. And the Corvette never fit that, obviously. So you always had to be a salesman to sell whatever you were working on, and you had to enlist everybody that was in that process, from sales to styling to engineering to manufacturing to whatever, to support the car. And the people that were involved in that, for the most part, were salespeople. And that's the reason it exists.
But most people don't need a Corvette. The four of us here needed a Corvette.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
That's the sales
That's
part.
it.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Absolutely.
I needed 15 of them.
Yeah.
There you go.
And you needed a big black.
I've had.
You need a big black.
I still have a big block.
Me too, yeah, baby.
Well,
Well,
that's what Ken has.
I have
Yeah.
a 95 ZR-1 at about 500 horsepower.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Out of necessity.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. One of the things that we learned from doing the C4 was we had management intrusion into the process that was not helpful. And I write about that, and I'm not going to go through it here, but we didn't have the structure stiffness that we really wanted to have in the car as a result of management getting in the way. And I won't say they were wrong, but it wasn't what we were planning to do. So with the C5, and we were involved in R&D with the gestation of that car. We figured out how to get the interior roominess, the torsion structure, and make it all work together in the front engine configuration. And then with the C6 and 7s, going toward more aluminum, that was useful. The C8, when you look at it, now I don't know what Taj would say, but in my way of thinking, the C8 structurally is the C7 backwards. Just look at it. You've got an
Makes
engine
sense.
at one end. It's like having a front-wheel drive car and engine at the same end. And then you've got the structure that carries to the other end of the car, and that structure is critical to the ride and handling and quality of the car. And we were able to get that into the C5 and carry it forward into the future cars. So that was very useful, without adding a lot of weight. You can always do it with weight, and we put so much effort into engine performance and trying to get it back with catalytic converters that we didn't want to lose it in weight. That's dumb. Yeah.
But Dave, would you say also too, structurally speaking, even though you guys did get to where you wanted to go with the C4, it was still a huge improvement over the C3 structurally, wasn't it? And then each successive one was an improvement. Is that a fair statement?
It was some improvement, but you get way down with accessories and other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just happens that way.
I'll ask one more question to kind of tie it all together. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that any of you guys see as significant of the related to the development of the mid-engine Corvette?
Not right now.
The only thing I'd say is that just the stars just seem to align right.
Yeah.
You know, personally, I was just fortunate enough to be at the right time at the right place. But again, I have to say, that car would not be there without all that had gone before. Everybody, all the men and women that worked on it over the years, all the way to Zora saying, Corvette must be mid-engine. Yeah, and even getting through, yeah, that's interesting, the comment about don't listen to, so what you were saying is the design staff was kind of pushed, they're really pushing the mid-engine more than the rest of the corporation, which I think is awesome vision.
Yeah, especially it's after 50 years, you know, of my personal experience, you know, that you finally get to the point where you have one, and man, it's great. It's like I'll leave it up to the future engineers to figure out what comes next, you know.
Yeah. Well, the one really unique thing that came about going from the C7 to the C8 was the dual clutch transmission, 8-speed transmission. And the guys have complained about, oh, we can't shift gears anymore. Well, with 8 speeds, you don't really want to shift gears. You can control the gears, but to actually do the shifting, you can get if you had a mechanical gear shift lever with 8 speeds on it, you'd be hard pressed to know what gear you were in. It's like some of these bicycles with the derailleur controls. You hardly have any idea as to what gear you're in.
How many times you got up a hill on a bike, one of those, it's like, you know,
Yeah.
getting messed up.
Yeah.
But to that point, you know, we had I think it was a Ferrari. What would that be? A 356. I forget which Ferrari. Jim had bought a few Ferraris for that. And I remember at the proving grounds, and so we had a C7, some other engine cars, Porsche. But I remember being in the Ferrari and going around the proving grounds, and you're driving. Two things I recognized that I kind of went to school. Actually, I learned a lot sitting in that car. It's the first time I've personally driven a mid-engine Ferrari. And first thing is I'm driving along and I had a co-pilot and test engineer with me. And he says, you know, when you're driving fast, you're watching the road. You're not watching a lot of the gauges. And I just remember the needle being like this. And he says, you know, you can shift now if you want. And I'm going, yeah, I'm thinking it's around 6 or so. Well, that position and it was at 9. So I was thinking it was 6 is okay. I had more to go. The other thing is that, you know, rather than steering like this, you're like here, you're right on it. That was the other thing that really struck me. Then the other one was, to your point, Dave, you know, your paddle shifting. I was thinking right then, because there was that internal dialogue about, oh, you know, do we mechanical shifter, or hand shifter, or paddles, or whatever, a combination. And that configuration and where we knew Corvette was heading, and you know, into you know, current and future high performance car environment. And believe me, I'm a big block stick guy. That would be just dumb in that car. I think you just have to have that paddle shifter to not only sequence those gears, but it just seemed most appropriate. You're right. It just wouldn't work.
Absolutely, yeah. My experience with Ferraris goes up as far as the 356. Mm-hmm. I drove one in Las Vegas for a day, for a legal case, actually. Got paid to do it. It's a beautiful car. Mm-hmm. The primary controls of the car are excellent. The secondary controls, like radios and HVAC system, are awful. It's almost like they had different engineers working on different parts of it, and it's like having an A team and a B team, or an F team in that case. Well, it was that bad.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and they actually had a cup holder in the 356, and in the middle of the day, I stopped at McDonald's and way out in the country from Las Vegas, and got a Diet Coke, and stuck it in the cup holder to get back underway, and I didn't even think about it until all of a sudden the drink flies out of the cup holder, and the top comes off, and it spews sticky Coke all over the passenger seat and floor.
Oh boy.
Well, it turns out they put the cup holder in at a 30-degree angle.
Oh.
What was that all about? Guaranteed to come flying out of
Yeah,
there.
wow.
Yeah. So, it's like a slap in the hand.
It was probably a joke on the American public. That's why the Europeans put cup holders in for Americans, right?
That could be. That could be.
It was an Italian joke, I think.
Yeah.